What if I were to tell you that the individual who appears the most powerful in the room might actually be the one struggling the most deeply within themselves? Beneath the layer of arrogance, the tendency to manipulate, and the relentless drive to dominate everyone else, there is often a profound psychological burden that most people never have the chance to see. If you have ever had to deal with someone like this in your own life, please make sure to subscribe and stay with me until the very end, because gaining a clearer understanding of these behavior patterns can genuinely transform the way you protect your own peace of mind. One of the most obvious indicators that a narcissist is suffering internally is their constant and seemingly desperate need for validation. When you look at them on the surface, it might appear to be nothing more than pure confidence. They love to talk at length about their various achievements, they tend to blow their own importance way out of proportion, and they consistently try to take charge of every conversation. However, hiding beneath that elaborate performance is a fragile sense of self that relies almost entirely on the reactions and feedback they get from others. A healthy, well-adjusted person is capable of feeling good about who they are even when there is no one around to witness it. A narcissist, on the other hand, simply cannot. Their internal sense of personal value is built almost exclusively on the foundation of external approval. When that steady stream of approval starts to fade or disappears altogether, the feeling of emptiness inside becomes impossible for them to ignore. This is exactly why narcissists are always fishing for compliments, recognition, or some form of public admiration. They might bring up their past successes over and over again, not because they are genuinely proud in a balanced way, but because they need someone to reassure them that they actually matter. Without that constant reinforcement, their carefully constructed self-image begins to develop cracks. Imagine for a moment what it would be like to try to hold up a massive wall that has absolutely no foundation beneath it. Every compliment they receive becomes just another brick trying to hold that structure together. Every single moment of attention they grab is a key that keeps the fragile illusion alive. But the very moment that people stop validating them, a wave of deep anxiety and intense insecurity starts to flood their system. You might notice just how visibly uncomfortable they become when somebody else happens to receive praise or attention instead of them. Rather than taking the time to celebrate the achievements of others, they will often interrupt the speaker, try to redirect the entire conversation, or attempt to outshine the person who is currently being recognized. This reaction is not just a simple case of arrogance. It actually reveals just how threatened they feel when they are no longer standing at the center of admiration. The success of someone else can feel like an objective proof that they are losing their own value. Another thing that exposes this hidden suffering is how intensely they react to silence or to being treated with indifference. Receiving direct criticism hurts them deeply, but being ignored can often feel even worse. When people stop reacting to their stories, their bragging, or their transparent attempts to impress, it creates a sense of deep emotional discomfort for them. The reason for this is quite simple. Without a constant flow of feedback coming from the people around them, they are eventually forced to face a version of themselves that feels empty, lost, and fundamentally uncertain. That is the quiet, painful struggle that stays hidden behind their endless search for attention and constant need for validation. Another powerful sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is their extreme sensitivity to any form of criticism. On the outside, they often present themselves as confident, strong, and entirely above the opinions of other people. They might act as if there is nothing in the world that can shake them. But in reality, even the smallest, most harmless piece of criticism can feel like a direct and dangerous attack on their entire identity. What might be considered a perfectly normal piece of feedback for most people can trigger an incredibly intense emotional reaction in a narcissist because their internal self-image is so incredibly fragile. For most healthy, stable individuals, hearing criticism can be an uncomfortable experience, but it can also be processed, reflected upon, and sometimes even used as a tool for personal growth. A narcissist finds it nearly impossible to do this. Their sense of self is built on the rigid belief that they must always appear superior, completely flawless, and in total control of everything. When someone points out a mistake, a minor weakness, or any kind of flaw, it threatens the carefully constructed image they rely on to maintain their internal stability. Instead of viewing criticism as helpful information, they experience it as a moment of total humiliation. This is the primary reason why their reactions to criticism are so often dramatic and completely disproportionate to the actual situation. They may become instantly defensive, overtly angry, or even physically aggressive. Sometimes they will immediately counterattack the person who criticized them, working quickly to shift the focus away from their own perceived shortcomings. Other times they might simply deny the criticism took place at all, refusing to acknowledge even the slightest possibility that they could have been wrong. In certain cases, they may even choose to play the victim, portraying themselves as being unfairly targeted or misunderstood by those around them. What makes this specific reaction so revealing is how rapidly their emotional state can shift. A person who was appearing perfectly confident and charming just moments before can suddenly become hostile, deeply sarcastic, or incredibly cold the moment their ego feels threatened. This sudden change is not random. It perfectly reflects the internal panic that occurs when their fragile self-image is challenged. Underneath this volatile reaction is a deep-seated fear of being exposed for who they really are. Criticism threatens to reveal the massive amount of insecurity and self-doubt they work so hard to keep hidden. Because they are unable to tolerate that exposure, they fight against it with denial, intense anger, or by assigning blame to others. The sheer intensity of that reaction often tells you much more about their internal struggle than the criticism itself ever could. Another sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is their constant sense of deep-seated envy and their tendency to compare themselves with everyone around them. While they often present themselves to the world as superior, highly successful, or more capable than anyone else, there is almost always a quiet but powerful sense of insecurity operating beneath the surface. Instead of feeling stable and secure in who they are, they measure their personal worth by constantly comparing themselves to other people. Every achievement they see, every compliment that someone else happens to receive, and every moment that another person gets to shine can trigger a very uncomfortable feeling deep inside them. This envy is rarely as obvious as people might expect it to be. A narcissist may not openly admit that they feel jealous of others. In fact, they often hide it behind a veil of criticism, biting sarcasm, or subtle, calculated attempts to minimize someone else's success. When another person achieves something meaningful, the narcissist might immediately point out flaws in the achievement, question whether the person actually deserved the credit, or try to shift the attention back onto themselves as quickly as possible. These reactions are not just signs of arrogance. They reveal a deep and painful discomfort with the idea that someone else might be genuinely valued, admired, or respected. For a narcissist, the success of another person can often feel like a direct, personal threat. Their entire sense of identity depends heavily on being seen as exceptional or superior to their peers. When someone else stands out in a crowd, it challenges that belief and creates a significant sense of internal instability. Instead of feeling inspired or motivated by the success of others, they often experience intense anxiety and quiet resentment because it forces them to question their own value. This constant, nagging comparison creates a cycle of immense internal pressure. They feel a heavy burden to appear more successful, more impressive, or more admired than anyone else in their circle. If they cannot achieve that perfect image in reality, they may choose to exaggerate their accomplishments, seek attention in various other ways, or attempt to bring other people down just to restore the sense of superiority they so desperately crave. Living with this constant level of comparison and hidden envy is an incredibly exhausting way to exist. It prevents them from ever experiencing genuine happiness for others and keeps them trapped in a rigid mindset where their personal value always depends on being better than the person standing next to them. Behind the mask of surface-level confidence, this pattern reflects a deep and ongoing struggle with insecurity and a lack of self-worth. Another sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is the emotional instability that always appears when they feel like they have lost control. Narcissists often go to great lengths to control their immediate environment, the flow of conversations, and even the emotions of the people around them. Control provides them with a much-needed sense of safety. It allows them to maintain the specific image they want others to see and prevents situations from arising where their internal weaknesses might be exposed. But when that sense of control starts to slip away, their emotional reaction can become incredibly intense and unpredictable. In everyday life, this might show up when someone happens to disagree with them, decides to set a boundary, or simply refuses to follow the expectations they have laid out. Even a very small, insignificant loss of control can trigger a reaction that feels completely out of proportion to the situation at hand. They may become visibly angry, defensive, dismissive, or suddenly turn cold and withdrawn. In some moments, they may explode with frustration, and in others, they may simply go quiet and provide the silent treatment to make others feel uncomfortable. These reactions are not just random mood swings. They often reflect the deep, visceral discomfort they feel when they are unable to manage how others perceive them. Being in control helps a narcissist maintain their sense of superiority and stability. When they feel as though they are in charge, they can easily guide conversations, shape the perceptions of those around them, and keep all the attention focused exactly where they want it to be. But the moment someone else challenges that control, it creates immediate emotional chaos internally. It forces them into a position where they must face the reality of uncertainty, criticism, or rejection, all of which threaten the carefully protected identity they work so hard to maintain. This is why many narcissists react so strongly when the people in their lives finally start setting clear, healthy boundaries. A simple refusal or a gentle disagreement can make them feel suddenly powerless. Instead of calmly accepting the limit that has been placed, they may try to manipulate the situation, attempt to guilt the other person into backing down, or escalate the conflict entirely in order to regain the control they feel they have lost. If those tactics fail to work, their emotional reaction can become even more volatile because they are finally being forced to confront the uncomfortable feeling of not being able to dominate the situation. Behind all of these reactions is a fragile emotional system that struggles to tolerate even a small amount of uncertainty or a perceived loss of power. When that control disappears, the anxiety and deep insecurity that were being managed through constant dominance suddenly rise to the surface, revealing the deeper, more painful suffering that hides behind their persistent need to control everything around them. During the initial stages of any relationship, whether it is a friendship, a family bond, or a romantic connection, people like this often come across as incredibly charismatic and genuinely engaging. However, as time marches on, their consistent pattern of manipulation, sharp criticism, and emotional volatility inevitably starts to push people away. Many narcissists struggle immensely to sustain healthy, long-term relationships because their insatiable need for constant admiration and total control eventually builds up an unbearable amount of tension for everyone involved. The people closest to them frequently begin to feel emotionally drained, completely unappreciated, or as if they are living under a microscope where they are constantly being judged. As the months or years go by, some individuals choose to distance themselves entirely as a necessary step to protect their own emotional well-being. Others might decide to stay physically present for various reasons, yet they emotionally withdraw, choosing not to share the same level of trust, vulnerability, or openness that they once provided. For the narcissist, this slow, gradual loss of connection can trigger a deep and painful internal conflict. On one side of the coin, they feel an intense, almost desperate craving for attention, admiration, and constant validation from those around them. On the other side, their own habitual behaviors are frequently the very things that damage the relationships they rely on to provide that emotional fuel. This leads to a repetitive cycle where they feel profoundly lonely and misunderstood, yet they struggle to recognize or take any responsibility for how their own actions contribute to the problem. Instead of taking the time to acknowledge the role they may have played in driving people away, they often frame the situation in a completely different light. They may successfully convince themselves that the people who left were just jealous, ungrateful, or simply incapable of appreciating how special they truly are. This convenient belief helps to protect their fragile self-image, but it simultaneously prevents them from ever confronting the root issue. As a result, their sense of isolation slowly but surely continues to grow. Over time, this leads to a very strange and detached emotional reality. They might still be seen seeking attention in social settings or across various online spaces, but genuine emotional closeness becomes an increasingly rare commodity in their life. The relationships that do happen to remain often feel shallow, unstable, or strictly transactional, serving only to meet their immediate needs. Beneath their surface-level confidence and that non-stop search for external admiration, there's almost always a lingering, heavy sense of loneliness. It is the quiet, unavoidable consequence of a lifestyle where the urgent need to protect their ego gradually replaces the ability to build authentic, supportive, and lasting human connections. Another sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is their intense, underlying fear of being exposed. When they are out in the world, they work incredibly hard to present a curated image of absolute confidence, high intelligence, immense success, or clear superiority over their peers. They are very careful about how others perceive them, often highlighting their perceived strengths while keeping anything that might make them appear human, flawed, or vulnerable deeply hidden. This crafted image becomes extremely important to them because it acts as the primary armor for the fragile sense of self they struggle to keep upright. Behind that carefully constructed mask, however, there is usually a constant, gnawing anxiety that someone might eventually discover the truth. That truth is that they are not nearly as perfect as they claim to be, not as powerful as they want everyone around them to believe, and certainly not as secure as they appear to be to the outside world. This paralyzing fear of being exposed can quietly influence a massive number of their daily behaviors. They may go out of their way to avoid situations where their specific skills or knowledge could be questioned, or they may react with extreme intensity when someone begins asking deeper or more personal questions about their life. You might notice how visibly uncomfortable they become the moment a conversation moves toward real honesty or personal accountability. If someone happens to gently point out inconsistencies in their stories or their behavior, the narcissist will often quickly change the subject, become instantly defensive, or go on the attack against the person who dared to raise the concern. These reactions are almost always desperate attempts to shut down the possibility that their carefully built image could start to crack. This fear also helps to explain why so many narcissists invest so much of their limited energy into controlling exactly how others perceive them. They may feel compelled to exaggerate their past achievements, reshape the details of stories to make themselves look like the hero, or dismiss people who threaten to challenge their personal narrative. Maintaining this perfect image eventually becomes a full-time psychological effort that consumes their life. Every interaction they have becomes another opportunity to reinforce the version of themselves they want the world to believe in. Living with this constant, underlying fear of being exposed creates an immense amount of internal pressure. It means they are almost never able to simply relax into their own authenticity, because doing so would risk revealing the deep-seated insecurity they have spent so much of their energy trying to hide. Instead of feeling secure in who they are, they feel an internal compulsion to perform a role that must always appear impressive, flawless, and completely unshakable. Beneath that persistent performance is usually a deep, quiet worry that one day someone will finally see through the mask and expose the raw vulnerability they have spent so much time trying to conceal. Another clear sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is the deep, persistent shame they carry around beneath their outward display of confidence. Even though they frequently appear to be proud, superior, or even outright arrogant, these behaviors often function as a heavy shield designed to protect them from an internal feeling they are terrified to face. That specific feeling is a powerful sense of personal inadequacy and shame that likely took root long before many of their current problematic behaviors began to manifest. It is important to remember that shame is very different from simple embarrassment. Embarrassment is usually temporary and tends to be tied to a specific situation or a singular mistake. Shame, on the other hand, goes much deeper into the core of a person. It creates the haunting, persistent belief that there is something fundamentally broken or wrong with who you are as a human being. For many narcissists, this painful and internalized belief sits quietly in the dark background of their identity. Because it is so intensely uncomfortable, they build complex psychological defenses designed to keep it hidden from both the people around them and from their own awareness. This is exactly why narcissists often react so strongly and violently when their minor flaws or mistakes are pointed out by others. A small, constructive piece of criticism does not just feel like helpful feedback to them. It can trigger that deeper, ancient feeling of shame they have spent years of their life trying to run away from. When that happens, they may respond with a burst of anger, flat-out denial, blaming others, or by aggressively attacking the person who had the audacity to point out the issue. These volatile reactions are almost always desperate attempts to push the shame back down before it has a chance to fully surface. To protect themselves from this internal pain, narcissists frequently construct a self-image that is the direct, total opposite of shame. They may portray themselves as exceptional individuals, highly successful in their fields, far more intelligent, or much more capable than the people around them. The stronger their inner sense of shame, the stronger their outward performance usually becomes to compensate. This is the main reason why some narcissists appear completely obsessed with status, public recognition, or constant admiration. These external signals help to temporarily silence the inner voice that keeps questioning their worth. Living with this hidden, burning shame can create a constant and exhausting emotional struggle. Even in moments when they receive praise or plenty of attention, the relief they feel is often very temporary because the deeper sense of insecurity remains completely unresolved. As a result, they are forced to keep seeking more validation, more recognition, and more external proof that they are actually valuable human beings. Beneath the confident, unshakable image they project to the world, this ongoing private battle with shame can quietly shape many of their daily behaviors and their most extreme emotional reactions. Another sign that a narcissist is deeply suffering is their intense, overwhelming fear of being abandoned. Even though they may act independent, dominant, or emotionally detached at times, many narcissists carry a heavy, deep-seated anxiety about being rejected, left behind, or no longer being valued by the people who occupy their lives. This fear often operates quietly beneath the surface of their behavior, heavily influencing how they treat others and how they respond the moment they feel a relationship starting to shift. In the early days, narcissists may appear extremely confident and secure within their relationships. They are often able to charm people very quickly, move relationships forward at an incredibly fast pace, and create the firm impression that they are highly desirable partners who would be difficult to replace. But underneath that surface-level behavior is often a desperate need to secure the attention and total loyalty of others. The constant presence of people who admire them or depend on them helps to stabilize their own fragile sense of self. When they begin to sense even a small amount of emotional distance from someone, their reactions can become incredibly intense and unpredictable. A text message that goes unanswered for a little too long, a minor disagreement, or a sign that someone is finally starting to focus on their own personal needs can trigger a wave of deep insecurity. Instead of calmly addressing the situation or communicating like an adult, they may respond with flashes of anger, manipulative guilt-tripping, or urgent attempts to regain total control of the relationship. These volatile reactions are almost always driven by the underlying fear that they might lose that person's critical attention or admiration. In certain situations, narcissists may even push people away on purpose before they feel they can be rejected themselves. They might suddenly become unnecessarily critical, dismissive, or strangely emotionally distant, creating a conflict that eventually damages the relationship beyond repair. While it may appear from the outside as if they simply do not care about the connection anymore, this behavior can actually be a defensive, preemptive strike. By ending or sabotaging the relationship first, they avoid the gut-wrenching experience of being the one who is left behind. Over time, this repetitive pattern creates a cycle of highly unstable relationships. They crave closeness and validation more than anything, but their overwhelming fear of rejection causes them to act in ways that slowly erode trust and destroy any chance of emotional safety. As their relationships continue to break down, the fear of abandonment often grows even stronger, reinforcing the very same toxic behaviors that keep the cycle repeating over and over again. Beneath the surface-level veneer of control and unearned confidence, this ongoing fear can quietly, yet effectively, shape nearly all of their most significant actions and emotional reactions.